I wanted to sort of make an introduction, like I said, to some of the people that are enjoying a lot of the incredible teas that you're helping to provide for us, and just kind of put a face to the name and your book as well. So, for everybody out there, I just wanted to introduce. I'm pleased to introduce the explorer and author of the Ancient Tea Horse Road. And I know, Jeff, you hold a lot. You wear a lot of hats as a traveler and a writer and a mountaineer and travel agent and a speaker and everything. So I think the one thing that we share in common is our passion for tea. So it's good to finally connect with you. So right now, I believe you're in Hawaii.
Right now, there's a lot of interest in tea in Hawaii, growing good tea. They've got soil, they've got a sort of a history of agricultural, longevity and richness. So yeah, part of what I'm doing in Hawaii is actually looking at land and assessing whether it would be good for potential tea growth in the future. And this is, locals looking long term to serve sort of a legacy on the land.
Yeah,
so
sure.
that in 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years, they could have some classic, some really good teas growing here.
What type of teas are they trying to produce there? Because I do recall actually having I think a black tea from Hawaii that was pretty nice, and I have a friend who has gone there and done some actually a little bit of harvesting himself. So
they're having success with a number of the species, Japonica, Bohea, and they're producing some good blacks, some very good greens, and some oolongs. More on the Big Island than here in Oahu. But I went to a couple places a couple of weeks ago, and phenomenal teas. And they're doing it right, I think, in the sense that they're building slowly and they're getting their production methods, kind of testing it out, making sure it's right. The raw materials are very good, and they certainly have I think agriculture is in this place's DNA. They have a great appreciation for whether it be fruit, vegetables, or just the trees, the fauna. They have a tremendous amount of greenery here. So I think tea in this part of the world will become something significant in the years to come.
Now it's a relatively new industry there. Or they've been producing tea on a small scale in small farms, or?
Yeah, I'm hearing some interesting tales. I just met with some, I guess, fourth generation, that there are, in fact, old tea trees growing on some of the islands brought by successive waves of immigrants from everywhere from China to the Philippines, from Japan. But I think it's relatively new industry, certainly from the perspective of deliberate cultivation of tea. I think there are some interesting tea trees that were just sort of left to go wild, which I'd really love to see, because those are kind of the granddaddies and the grandmas of the tea world. But I think deliberate cultivation and more detailed harvesting methods, that's sort of a new thing here in Hawaii.
Yeah, I mean, it goes without being said. I think we're pretty lucky to have tracked you down during this season because, as everyone knows, it is the spring harvesting season, and I think from reading maybe some of your past blog entries and just kind of things about your thoughts, you probably try to avoid, I guess, the big rush for the spring season. But if you weren't in Hawaii, what would you be looking out for, and what should we be kind of looking out for in the spring?
So yeah, normally at this time of year, I'm, as much as and you said it correctly, I try to be away from the hype, but as much as I try to be away from it, I wish I was there, because it's my sort of green party season, I guess. So after Hawaii, I go back to Yunnan and I see what's left. So in southern Yunnan, with the pu'ers particularly, the really good gardens sometimes sell their teas out a year in advance. So everything they produce will be pre-sold. So I go and track down teas that maybe are a little bit off the grid. I have a sort of a favorite area that wander through. It's a corridor of southern Yunnan along Laos and Burma, the Pulang Mountains. There's a number of little villages, Pu people, Pulang people, Wa people, you have Hani people. So each one of these villages in the Pulang range produces a Pulang Shan tea, a Pulang mountain tea. Having said that, each village has different characteristics. They slightly different drying, different frying methods. Some are very detailed. Some are completely random. And it's often in these villages that produce random teas that you find no consistency, but you find the really special teas, the sort of the one-offs. And I can't say that I would buy with confidence every season from them, but what you do get is you get, let's say, a spring 2014 tea that is stupendous.
Right away.
Right away. And you just, you taste it again, you smell it, you go back 3 or 4 days, sometimes a week in a succession, and you just keep sampling. And if it's really good, in my case, what I do is I say, how much have you got? If you've got 10 kilos, 40 kilos, buy the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it becomes a tea that we sell or I drink once, because I often go back to these villages, and these villages are sort of looking at thatched roofs and electricity that's questionable, and consistent methodology in tea production is not a strength of theirs. But what they do is they produce some outstandingly bad teas, and 6 months later they create a masterpiece. Sort of by accident, these happy series of accidents create a really good tea. And those are the teas actually that, I like to find consistency, but I really like to find those one-off teas that are from a place that nobody's heard of, and just kind of keep it in my storeroom, or if we can source more of it, obviously try to get it out to people who enjoy tea, such as you're doing. So while I always know that there's certain villages I can go to for consistent teas that I know I'm going to sit down and really enjoy the tea, it's almost like traveling into the dark Netherlands of unpredictability in these villages where you're drinking some teas that are barely tea. They're produced so badly, and yet you're sometimes getting something that's truly magnificent, and in a way it's beautiful, because it exists there and then, and that's it. That's kind of it after that production run's done. And sometimes they don't even recognize when they've gotten the tea right.
Really?
It's still subjective.
Yeah. Well, realistically, when you do find a tea in a small village, or a family community, how much do they even have? Is it realistic that you could buy more than 10 kilos or 20 kilos? Or?
It really depends. I found sometimes there's 100 kilos that's sitting there. Sometimes you taste some tea and they try to convince you that the tea that you just tasted is in fact that 100 kilos sitting there, and it's not.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah. Generally, I'd say anywhere between 10 and maybe 40, 50 kilos. If there's, they will keep it. And often what I do is, in these old huts, if you go up to their little attic space with a torch or a flashlight, you can find old tea cylinders that they've still kept. So, there's a lot of hype around old tea.
Yeah.
Not only from the old trees, but old tea. Well, the indigenous that I get tea from never consume old tea.
Sure.
They consume it fresh, pungent, potent, and almost almost reckless with what it can do to the enamel. It's really fresh, bitter green tea.
Yeah.
But sometimes in their attics, you'll find these old cylinders, could be 20, 30 years old. And for me, it's a masterpiece. For them, it's, just take it. They have no interest. And yet in the West, and it's not just the West, in Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, even Japan, people old pu'er teas are really something that are coveted. And yet it's always interesting to go into these indigenous villages. For the indigenous villages, for the most part, they don't don't have a tradition of drinking old, darker teas.
Yeah.
It's more something that's sort of taken on a bit of a, I don't
Life of
know,
its
it's
own.
sort of like a collector's item.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you about that because I mean, I think being somebody who's an expert on pu'er and in the regions and the peoples and the cultures and everything like that, you probably get asked a lot. I mean, there's so much confusion in the pu'er market, and everyone's trying to understand what exactly is pu'er. And there's inflated prices and fake teas, and it's a little bit frustrating. But my understanding was that you're probably similar to me, and that you prefer the fresher, potent vegetal raw teas. Do you have any appreciation for old teas? Do you like drinking old teas, or do you think that's something left for people in Hong Kong and Taiwan?
No, I think at the beginning I was a bit untrusting of anything that
Mm-hmm.
people said was old. And I mean, when we say old, for indigenous, they'll call a 6 and 7-year-old tea an old tea.
Aged, yeah.
Where I think in some of the bigger, finer tea shops, we tend to say it's 40, 50, 60 years old. First thing is, it's very hard to actually verify how old a tea is, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say a 50-year-old tea, the chances of that being true are very, very, very low.
I'm sure.
So in China right now, they're actually trying to designate what makes up a pu'er. So they're the three important. It's like Champagne in Burgundy region of France.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to designate. It has to be grown, produced, harvested in Yunnan province. It has to be the big leaf Assamica varietal, and it has to go through a combination of sun and shade drying. I don't know how you can prove that, but these are the three sort of the three pins of what a pu'er is. I very much prefer the raw, sort of pungent, explosive green teas, and they're not always volatile, but I feel like I can taste the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But I have been sort of introduced by some elders to drinking teas that are about 10 years old first thing in the morning because they're far less acidic, and they're a very good tonic in the morning. The elders often use these teas as a sort of first thing in the morning. They drink a bit of tea to get the organs, the kidneys, the pancreas, the liver stimulated. And yeah, they're certainly I think there's a time and a place for them. They're far less caffeinated, and they lose a lot of their stimulant compounds over this aging period, so they become more like a much more smooth and maybe more of a beverage before bed type thing.
Yeah, sure.
But I will drink a shopu, and I do like a good black pu'er. There are some very good teas out there, and that tea, as I understand it from a medicinal point of view, is much more of a digestive tea, far less of the antioxidant polyphenols and catechins, all of these sort of keywords in a tea.
Mm-hmm.
But I do enjoy it, but I without hesitation, would continue the rest of my days happily gobbling down as much green, fresh, volatile tea as I can.
Right on. While we were talking about some of the regions and the mountains and maybe some of the less often seen ones that you come across, somewhat selfishly, I wanted to ask you. You had sent us some Jingmai and some Bangma and some Bulang pu'ers that we all love, and so I wanted to know if you wanted to say something about those particular regions, if you have a personal favorite. And also you said something about the show pu'ers, like you're sending us some Jingmai show pu'er, and that's something that I want everyone to be prepared for because we're excited.
Well, I'll start with the easiest one for me. The Jingmai is a region, a mountain, and a town of primarily Bulang and Dai people. Their teas are probably the most consistent teas every year that I found. So if you like a Jingmai now, you'll probably like it in 3 years. It's a very consistent. Their production methods are very good. Huge, long tradition, and they have some of the oldest old-growth tea tree forests on the planet in the Jingmai region, very close to the border with Burma. So the Jingmai unfermented, the green one that I've sent you, is I would say it's one of three favorites of mine, surely because it's very floral, it's very light. Jingmai species is actually a slightly smaller hybrid of the larger Assamica leaf.
Okay.
So it has a slightly different set of properties. And it's more of a floral light. I think it's a great entry-level green pu'er that is superb quality, consistent. The Jingmai Show pu'er that you're going to be receiving, that is one of only 2 black pu'ers that I drink.
Really?
And again, it's a really, really soft. It's slightly aged. It's 2008, so it's even mellowed slightly more. But it's a beautiful. It's just very, very smooth. These are very smooth teas. So Jingmai is sort of a consistent model for this slightly floral, a little bit less astringent tea. The other tea that you mentioned is an old favorite of mine, Bangma. This is from the Nano Mountain area in southern Yunnan, and it's got a lot of clay, and the sugar content within the tea trees and the tea bushes themselves is slightly higher in this region. So you've got a really strong tea that's modulated and moderated by the sugar, and I say sugar, I mean naturally occurring vegetal compound sugar, rather than people who are worried about diabetics and this sort of thing. The Bangma is one of my favorites just because it's been off the grid for so long that they have never had to over-harvest. There's never been an expectant buying club of people waiting for more and more Bangma to be sold. So they've been able to sort of take their time. It's a honey indigenous area. And the honey people and the dye people are the 2 indigenous groups that have probably the best combination of raw product and technical know-how. The honey people were one of the first groups to actually get a lot of Chinese technical production know-how to sort of put a nice sort of fine edge on their already great teas. And the Bangma is, if I had to drink one tea for the rest of my days, the Bangma that you're selling would be it. That's goes without saying. And the thing about the Bangma also, so we have this expression of old tea tree, and we have this expression of old tea. This is from an old tea tree. So all of the Bangma of this year that you've got, these are all from ancient tea trees. So these are tea trees that are 10, 15 meters high up in the forests. So all an old tea tree does is it's a smoother taste than a smaller tea bush because it's had time to sort of balance itself out. The root systems of these old trees they plunge straight down, harvesting all of the minerals. So the tastes are more complex. I would say once you start in on a tea like a Bangma, ancient tea tree tea, you're finished for going back to I wouldn't say the cheap stuff, but it's a significant step up if you get it. If you get that taste, if you understand it and enjoy it. It's very difficult to go from a Jingmai, for instance, and a Bangma, old ancient tree tea, down to something else that's you'll taste it immediately.
Yeah.
And these are not snobby choices, by the way. These are sort of off the grid choices that it's wonderful that they can get more exposure. People can get their palates exposed to these sorts of flavors because 3, 4, 5 years ago, these tastes, these flavors were hard to source outside of Yunnan, or sometimes just even outside of a small region.
Yeah, and we certainly appreciate it. I'll say that. It's fun. It's fun. Also, like for anyone that doesn't know, one of the things that Jeff really paints really well as far as tea goes is not just the tea itself and where it comes from and everything, but it's more the human aspect and the people and the minorities and the cultures and the customs surrounding it and villages that they're so source of income and their way of life is surrounding tea. Um, you were saying how once you go to some of these teas, it's definitely hard to go back to a lower quality or a less flavorful or less complex tea. I was wondering, and I think somebody else asked me recently, do you ever, I know you had spent some time in Taiwan and probably the eastern part in China. Do you ever drink any green teas, white teas, black teas? I'm sure you drink some oolong.
Yeah, I mean, I have this wonderful sort of network of tea junkie people around. So we're constantly. Sometimes it's the very last thing on our minds is about business. So if I find a tea that is actually not to my taste, but I recognize it as a good tea, I may actually have a friend who, or he likes that sort of thing, or she really enjoys it. So I get a lot of little sampler gifts. I have to say I am probably not as experimental as I should be beyond southern Yunnan, but I started my tea journey in Taiwan 15 years ago, wandering through Nantou County, where they produce some amazing oolongs, Dong being, which is outside Lishan, Dayuling oolongs. So I do really enjoy a Taiwanese oolong once in a while, because it just takes my palate somewhere totally different. And when I was recently back in Canada, a friend gave me some, and I forget, Nilgiri. It was a pungent, sort of like a hammer, a black tea from India, and it was great. It was great. I'm not someone who says no to tea. I'm someone who says no to tea after I've tried it, or yes, more please, or something. So yeah, but I have this ritual. I never experiment with a new tea in the morning. I need to start the day with solid teas that my body knows, and it needs to start tweaking. I need to start sort of feeling its familiarity. I generally try new stuff in the afternoons, when my palate's a good time after lunch. And I want to see what's out there. I'm always interested in small garden stuff. So if I find, a friend sends something and says, listen, it's not particularly expensive, but this is a really neat region, and they're doing this and this right. So I'm keen. I tried some white tea recently that was good, but my water temps were off, and I think I assassinated that particular tea pretty well. Maybe once a month, have a 2-day period of a splurge on something that's totally foreign.
Okay.
Like just something totally off, something that I'm not planning on drinking. It's kind of fun to just, let's try something different. This was sent on to me.
See what it tastes like.
Yeah.
But you don't drink coffee, do you?
Oh, I do like a good coffee. I mean, in Hawaii they have great coffee here, Kona. I drink coffee once a week maximum. It just doesn't. I actually do not feel that I am sane after more than a cup a week or a cup every 2 weeks. Huh? Totally different effect for me, and I've heard that this has to do with metabolism, body temperature, all this stuff. So coffee and we have an appreciation for one another, but it's across the room.
One of the other things we were sort of wondering about, so I read your book a couple times. I've passed it on to several people that really enjoyed it. It's fun to kind of feel like you're part of the adventure, but not, freezing or, enduring those type of conditions that you've been through. But, I do understand that you do quite a bit of traveling throughout the year, whether it's talking and spreading knowledge and sort of, engaging on all things that are beyond tea, the people themselves. I was wondering, are you thinking about writing another book or?
Yes. There's a book. There's actually a tea book in the pipeline right now. I'll be co-authoring it. It's I'm not actually allowed to talk too much about it. But yes, there is, and it's going to be more tongue in cheek. It's going to be adventure, but it's going to have tea very much more as the center point of every single page and paragraph.
Okay, well that's exciting. It'll give us something to look forward to.
Oh yeah, and it's, I I think as people drink more tea, people understand that tea is special in ways that maybe need to be appreciated and not pontificated too much.
Agreed.
You know, in so much of Asia, tea is just a fact of life, whether it's a classic Dien Hong or if it's just a forgotten tea on a little part of a garden at the back of a forest. So information is very important, whether it be by book or blog, or because so often now I read online pieces of information that are pretty close to being absolutely categorically false. and it's information that gets rehashed and slightly reworked and reposted and rewritten. And so I think it's important in my writings, or I often go to listen to other people speak. It's important that actually something new, something original, something authentic is communicated rather than the same old pieces of information. Because, one thing that surprises me often is how often people in the West think that black tea has more caffeine and stimulant punch than a potent green.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a Western wives' tale that's been spread, and it's amazing how many people don't know that, in fact, greens and oolongs are just laden with stimulants. So they're drinking it before they go to bed, and then they're wondering why after a week that they're feeling slightly homicidal.
No, it's absolutely true. And I do realize that like a lot of even tea companies, like huge, multinational tea companies, think that basically the darker the brew, the higher the caffeine or stimulating quality to it. And as that relates to pu'er, show pu'er, something that well, a lot of people like to drink before bed or after a meal, kind of settle down, is regarded sometimes, at least in the U.S. I'm not going to implicate Canada, but people think that this stuff is like coffee, and it's really unfortunate that there's that kind of misinformation. But great that guys like yourself are out there, bringing authentic, original material. So we'll look forward to that.
Great.
I remember last year, another thing I wanted to ask you about was you're working on some project with UNESCO, and I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it or what. Is there something that we should be looking out for? Is there a documentary or,
No, this was there's more work that's going to be done. We're doing so I was in touch with a guy from Brazil who was based in Thailand, and he comes from a mate culture. So they drink this. It's not at all Camellia sinensis related, but it's a bitter herb that the gauchos, or the cowboys on the plains of Brazil and Argentina, they drink out of the silver straw in a gourd, and it's potent, stimulant, same idea. Mm. So we've been in touch. He was interested in coming to the tea regions, and I didn't really understand what he wanted to do at first, and I thought, well, I don't want to be a glorified tea guide but anyways, so what he did was and this was part of our project, we actually brought mate into these cultures and served it to the tea villagers, old friends of mine. And the idea was that while we were imbibing tea, that they would be part of this mate culture. And the mate culture is in a way, it's very similar in that it's a very communal thing. You pass a cup around and use the same straw. And so we shared mate, and part of it was to share, but part of it was also for this, that he subsequently became a very good friend of mine, Marco, to observe what tea meant to these groups of people, these indigenous peoples, whether they be Han Chinese, Hani, Hua, Tibetan. Everybody has a very strong view of tea. Tea is something, it's like a great panacea. It's got no equal in the West, to my mind. So we were there to observe, to document, to take notes, and we're sort of in the process of forming, it's like a gazette of information. So one component is very academic. Another component is very just observational. How tea makes the kids feel. Pregnant women in these villages often drink tea up into a certain month, and then they switch into a different tea, and that's a tradition. Some of the minorities add honey, peppercorn, to give it a higher medicinal effect during times of fever or if someone has been off food for a few days. So there's all of these other elements to tea that are important. And a major component of what we were doing with UNESCO was, by intuition and habit, a lot of these tea towns in southern Yunnan, at least, are intuitively sustainable. They've never sprayed because number one, they couldn't afford the pesticides.
Yep.
And number two, they just don't have this tradition of spraying the ancient trees. Mm. It's considered sacrilegious to them. So in a way, their coming of age has been rewarded, because now their teas are, selling for fairly significant amounts of money, whereas in the past they had no markets, and they don't overharvest. They have this intuitive disgust and knowledge that if they overharvest to satisfy a need this year, that next year their crop actually will take a quality hit. So there's all these little aspects to these smaller tea towns, and you mentioned multinationals and big companies. But these little places will never be able to supply the big companies. They just don't have the bulk, weight, and amount, and they pick at their leisure. There are seasons where they harvest, but it's not a machine. There aren't machines rolling, like there are in parts of India, even Taiwan, Japan, China. You don't have that. It's all manual labor, and it's very much, it's something of the old world. Very little has changed in their production and cultivation. So the project was basically to maybe shed a bit of light on the tea world beyond simply a cup. More into the people aspect, which you mentioned earlier, because that is hugely important. Tea has this wonderful connection to people and to the earth, and I think the more we can show that, make it transparent to some degree, the more people understand what this thing called tea is.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll look out for that too. Yeah, really appreciate it. The last question. Are you still leading the tea tours? You were doing, I know you were doing some work with Wild China, and then I saw something somewhere about leading a tea tour in Sri Lanka.
Yes, the light of my life up till this point, at least one of my great loves, has been doing the Tea Horse Road Tour through Yunnan, and that's still running. In fact, this autumn we'll be running it again. Doing that, which is basically through these indigenous areas, seeing rituals that are basically dying using tea. Some of them are, one involves digging up tea that's been basically stored in composting in a bamboo husk for up to 2, 3, 4 years in the ground, digging it up and eating it with rice. It's an old tradition. Up through Yunnan, and we finished the tour, in basically over 3,300 meters, the Tibetan zones before the tea passed into the Great Himalayan spires. We've developed a tea trek through Sri Lanka, which will take in a very different terrain. And we're now, with Wild China, we're talking about doing a much more muscular tea journey through China, introducing people to not just Yunnan, but to Fujian, Guangzhou, all these areas in the southeast, also the southwest, Hangzhou, to sort of, again, provide more of a tangible visual into the world of tea, into some of these classic areas of traditional tea growth. So yes, and I mean the tours are amazing, because it's not just me about it. Of course, it's about me and talking and monologuing a lot, but it's incredible to see people kind of, wait a minute, what? It's a pancreatic tonic. So the last trip I did, big trip, there were a couple of, gentlemen in their 60s who obviously, they were on the trip to see landscape. Tea was of a very secondary importance. By the end of it, they were hauling back tea, because we got this conversation going. It's one of the great pancreatic tonics, so it actually stimulates the insulin levels in the body. And for the elders, it's it's the great cure for hangovers because it actually breaks down the alcoholic glucids and sugars within the blood at a faster rate. So these tours, yeah, they begin about tea, but they end up being so much more. It's about health, it's about geography, and opening a world up of, the leaf, the great green leaf.
Well, we'll look forward to hopefully joining you on one of these tours, because that's I told you before, that's something that I definitely plan on doing, coming out and doing some of the sourcing and seeing some of these things, because it's it's a very, very exciting to hear and experience, and I guess understand better the story behind the tea, and so that's definitely something we were hoping to accomplish today. So yeah, Jeff, I really appreciate your time, and I hope we can do this again sometime. I'm sure there'll be a lot of follow-up questions.
Sure.
And we'll definitely look forward to getting that Chiang Mai.
Good. Well, I have to say, I don't want to use the word courageous because that's going to make you potentially paranoid about what you're getting. But you've got some teas that are incredibly special, not simply to the world of teas, but you've got teas that rarely, if ever, make it out of regions within Yunnan. Not simply out of China or out of Yunnan, but this stuff doesn't get out there very often. So, in fact, what you're doing also is you're one of those precious links, because you're providing people's palates an opportunity to sample some of these teas. And, who knows what the future brings for tea and tea consumption, but the teas you're providing are very, very special items, very particular, handcrafted things that are timeless, really.
Well, we're more than happy to play that role. So, again, thank you very much, Jeff. We'll definitely be in touch, and we'll look out for a lot of these things you have on the horizon.
Pleasure. Good speaking, Brett.
Enjoy the rest of your day, Jeff.
Cheers. Bye.